afternoon, Miss Young here, and today I'm going to do another decimal to hexadecimal. This time, rather than just the console JavaScript, today we're going to do it as a HTML, CSS and JavaScript on the front end. Now, hopefully we will see why we don't do this at GCSE. Even at A-level, this will maybe help you a little bit with some of the A-level, but I wanted to really show you how we could do it, but also how more involved it is and why, although it seems boring, we stick to console apps at GCSE and even at A-level. So the first thing that I've done here is I've set up a project in Visual Studio, and I have a browser open on this side. I have Visual Studio on this side, and normally we would separate our HTML file, our style file and our JavaScript file into 3 separate files, but what I wanted to do is show you today the difference between a console app and a HTML, CSS, JavaScript app. And so I'm going to do it all in one single document, which is acceptable. And in many cases, particularly where we're above the fold, it's perfectly, it's a legitimate way to proceed. So for the moment, I'm just going to delete these two. This main.js is the code that we had from the last video. And just so that we can do a direct comparison, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up, this is the one that I'm going to use, this code here. So this is how we would do decimal to hexadecimal in JavaScript on the back end, or as a console app. So the problem with this is that not only do we have to think about the code, we also have to think about the markup or the layout. So this is a really basic and simple example. It's not something that I would feel proud of to put on the internet, but it's something that will help you hopefully in your exams. So the first thing that I want is I'm going to have a title at the top. Then I'm going to have an input box with some prompts, enter the number, for example. Then I'm going to want a button which says something like convert. And then when I click the button, I want to show, let's say you entered 42. I want it to show in big letters down here the hexadecimal response. So how can we do that in markup? Well, the first thing we want to do is remember that we need to subdivide our page into divisions, or in HTML we think of those as divs. And so we can immediately see that we've got this main square division here. So that's one division. Then we can say that we have another division here. We have one here, and we have one here. So this allows us to break it down into smaller chunks. And if I think about it semantically, then this is what I would call the input section. This is what I would call the answer section. And then we have the main section, or the main wrapper. And so if we think about it like that, then it helps us to develop our code. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start off by trying to write this code. Now, as I said, I am in Visual Studio Code and I'm going to cheat and I'm going to press the exclamation mark and it's going to give me by magic the starting point. Now I'm running what's called live server as well, which means that any updates I make on here, it will automatically update on here, except for anything to the head. So if I do this now, you're going to see that the header here is actually not visible to you, but it says document. So I'm going to just change that to be decimal to hex converter, and we're not seeing any change. I'm seeing a change, you're not, because the tab is hidden. So what did we say? Well, we want to have this main section, which is a division, and you could quite happily use a div because that would work just fine. But semantically, there is a element called main, which is essentially a div, but it makes more sense semantically. It's the main section, so it's still a div, but it's called main. So then we said we want the input section. Again, we could quite happily use a div. There would be nothing from a HTML point of view wrong with that, but there is a more semantic called section, and we needed two of those sections. We wanted the input section, as you can see here, and we wanted the answer section. So we've created these two sections, and within this section we know that we want an input, and it doesn't matter what the type is at this point in time, and we said we wanted some placeholder which said something like enter a number. In fact, it's a decimal number 0 to 255, and if we do that, we can see that's there. But what did we miss before the main section? We want this title section, and it just so happens that a header is what's called a block level, which means that it will take up the whole space. So I'm going to say something like, what title shall I use? Simple decimal to hexadecimal converter. And so now you can see we have a main section. Inside that we have the header here, then we have a input section here, and what we need now is a button, and inside that button we said we're going to go and call that convert. So I know it's a little bit difficult to see behind here, but we have the input and we have the button. So now finally in here we want to put a paragraph, and we will eventually want to make that paragraph or the contents of that paragraph dynamic to fill in the answer. But for the moment, just so that we can complete what it looks like, we can see the 2A here. And so what we have is we've got the basic markup. It doesn't look pretty, and what I'm going to do now that we have that, is I'm going to take that away. You can see I can't spell converter, and that is the basic markup. We haven't made it look pretty, we haven't changed any of its styling. That by default, as I said, this is a block level element, so these two come on to the next line. These are called inline elements, and that's why even though they're underneath each other, they actually go across the page. And then a paragraph or in a section is a block level, which is why the 2A is on its own. Now I'm just going to pause the video for a second while I remove my tablet, and then we'll move on from there. So apologies for the continuity error there. I said I was going to pause the video and put my tablet away. Unfortunately, I didn't pause the video, and then when I came back, I did pause the video, and so the remaining parts of what I was saying was not recorded at all. So this is hopefully part 2, and we'll move forward. So at the end, before I put my tablet away, we had created the markup, and we can see it in front of us here. And so, as we said, it's not very pretty, but it does what it needs to do. Now, like I said, normally I would put these in different files, but for today's purpose, I'm going to put the JavaScript inside of this file here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this function, which we had before, and I'm going to copy it and put it into here. And I'm just going to change that because it's the only one that we have, decimal to hex. And I'm just going to format the document, a nice feature of modern IDEs. And the problem we have is that we don't have this prompt, and this code is not going to work for us. So I'm just going to comment those 4 lines of code out so we can see what extra we need if we want to do proper front-end development. We've already seen that we need to add this HTML here. We were able to cheat and get the boilerplate started, but we've had to add this code so far. And so the first thing I'm going to need to do is I need to be able to access this input, and I need to be access this paragraph. So I'm going to give this an ID, and unfortunately this is the second time I've done it, so I remember I'm going to give it an ID of decimal because that's the decimal inputs, and I'm going to give this an ID, it's the answer, so it is answer. Now again, this is not necessarily the way that I would do it if I were writing code myself, but this is the most appropriate way for top GCSE and A-level. So now that I have access to those, inside my main script, I can say something like I want it's going to be a constant, and the input val is equal to the document dot get element by ID, and the ID we want is decimal. So that will return a reference to the input here, and from there we can get its value, and we can set if it's value, but in this particular case all we want to do, well, we want to be able to set it to be an empty string, perhaps when we've hit convert, and then we want to get the answer. So I'm going to say the answer is equal to document dot get element by ID, and we want the answer. And just to show how this will work, I'm going to get rid of this 2a here now, and I'm going to say that the answer, because that's an element, we can set it in a, we can set it as in a HTML, but we only want text, and I'm going to set that manually to be 2a, and hopefully, or just so that we can see the change, we can see how it changes here. So we can see that now that we have that, we can make a change to the text. So I'm going to finish with that for the moment. So the next thing we need to do is when I hit the convert button, I want it to run this decimal to hex. Now, because sometimes I spend forever checking whether it's working or not, what I like to do is just put a quick alert here, so that if what I do is correct, we'll know whether it's running the code or not. So we're going to say, when we do the button, when we click it, on the click, we want to run this decimal to hex. And so let's see what happens. And you can see that it's giving us alert, hello. So we know that when we click this button, it is working. So now I can get rid of that little test here. So what do I need to do now? Well, we want to get this D number, but at first we want to get the value. So I'm going to say constant val, because it's not going to change, is equal to input val dot, and we get the value using value. And what else do I need to do? Well, at this point, that's fine. So now I can say that my D number, which is the number that I finally want to get down here, is equal to, we want to make sure that it's an integer, so in JavaScript, we can use something called parseInt, and we can put that in val, and that will return either not a number or a number. Well, in every other video we've done, we've not worried about being invalid numbers, so for the moment we're not going to worry about that. So we can simply say if D number is less than 0 or D number is greater than 255, then what we want to do, well, first thing we should probably do is we should set the val dot value to be equal to an empty string, and we should probably also set the answer dot inner text to be an empty string, and then we can say alerts invalid entry, and then because we're done we want to return. And so we should now, at least if we put something in here, that's not going to help. Let's try going 567 and we get invalid entry. So that's good news. So what do we want to do from here? Well, we have D number, and we can then continue to use D number, but well, we can still continue to console log it out. But what we can do also is we can say, as we said before, that the answer dot inner text is equal to h digit 1 plus h digit 2. So with a bit of luck, if I put in here 42 now, it gives me 2a. If I put in here 255, it gives me FF. So we can see now that although it's not very pretty, we have some working code. So but in order to get an input, we replaced these 4 lines and validation. We replaced these 4 lines with all of these lines, these 2 lines, and given that we were able to cheat, this markup as well. So we can see that just to do a simple input using JavaScript HTML, then it's far more involved than doing a simple console application, and that's why at GCSE and even for exam purposes in A-level, we try to stick away from HTML JavaScript. Although if you're doing something like AQA and you want to get top marks, then doing something like this, making it into a GUI or a JavaScript HTML front end, is going to get you into the top category. So I hope this has been some help to you. I've been Ms. Young, and hopefully I'll speak to you later.